have the honor of having José Manuel Barroso here today. He has been the president of the European Commission. He has served 12 years for the government of his home country, Portugal. He was prime minister, he was minister of foreign affairs, and he knows a lot about Europe, the role of Europe. We will be talking about the future role of Europe in these turbulent times. And yes, we will be talking about the role of Switzerland in Europe in the future. Please give a very warm welcome to José Manuel Barroso.
That's quite the entrance, right? Hello, good to see you. Please have a seat.
Mr. Barroso, I changed the cap to make Europe great again. I didn't want to trigger you.
Thank you. Beautiful, beautiful.
Let's talk about Switzerland first. Maybe first question. You have a very close relationship to our country. I think your son was born here. You lived 6 years in Switzerland. And you can claim something that maybe not all of us can claim. You've been in all 26 cantons, right?
Yes, yes, because I came here in '79 with a scholarship of the Swiss government. And so I thought that being received by this great country, I should at least know the country. So I had a second-hand Volkswagen Golf. And with my wife, I married. In fact, I came here in '79, I married in '80. I decided to go all over Switzerland, not staying every night in every, but I've been in all the 26 cantons, including those that in the French part they call la Suisse primitive. the Appenzell,
exactly.
Uri, Schwyz. So I've been all over Switzerland.
So you know our country well. We will be talking about what you think our country should be in Europe, the role of our country, but let's get that one topic out of the way as well. The things that are going on at the moment, when we talk about the tariffs, when we talk about the trade relationships between a lot of countries and the US, we talk a lot about the challenges. Where do you see the opportunities when we talk about Europe in that regard?
I think there is a great opportunity for Europe, in fact. I would say, even a little bit provocatively, that the two great federators, those who are doing more to federate Europe, are Mr. Putin and Mr. Trump. Because they are creating the external incentives for Europe to unite. Look at the United Kingdom now, which they left the European Union, which of course we respect fully. The same, of course, with Switzerland, that is not a member. But now they are working very, very strongly, for instance, in the field of defense, and not only in the field of defense, to be together. So I think it's a great opportunity also for Europe, because we have to make our own homework. It's very tempting sometimes to put the blame on others, and I'm not one of them. I don't like to say that it's the fault of the Americans or the fault. The reality is that in Europe we should have done much more for our economy and for our competitiveness. And it was not because of Mr. Trump or Mr. Biden or Mr. Obama or Mr. Bush, those I know well, I worked with them very closely, that, for instance, we have not yet completed the internal market for services, or why we don't have a capital markets union. It's not because of the Americans, because we were not really committed. Our countries, namely the most influential countries in the European Union, were not really committed to make that integration. So now I think it's going to happen. By the way, defense Europe in European terms is going to make a lot of progress in terms of industry, precisely because there are the external incentives. One of the founding fathers of the European community, a great man of great vision, Frenchman called Jean Monnet, he said, la communauté se fera dans des crises et comme l'ensemble des réponses à des crises successives. European community is going to make through crisis and as the sum of successive responses to successive crises. And in fact, it's only in terms of crisis that Europe makes progress.
And you talk about Europe being in a triple crisis at the moment.
Exactly.
Which is, only one would be enough. But how do we deal with three? And maybe you can elaborate more about this.
I mean, we are, of course, an economic crisis. Europe has lost competitiveness with the United States and China. We are lagging behind the United States and China in some of new technologies, including AI. I was recently in China. It's amazing what they are doing. It's really amazing what they are doing. In some areas, they are ahead of the United States already, in some commercial apps of AI, not in all aspects of AI. Also, we are now with this challenge, extremely very important challenge of defense coming from
The war.
the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. And we have also all the uncertainty coming from the United States. So in face of a much more assertive China, a much more aggressive Russia, and a much more unpredictable United States of America, it makes sense that Europe, and when I say Europe, I mean all Europe, because Switzerland is Europe, I'm not member of the European Union, of course, and we fully respect that. But of course, Switzerland, United Kingdom, Norway, I can tell you, if you go to Asia, if you go to America, if you go to Africa, they don't know the difference between
all Europe, right?
Switzerland or Austria. That's or even between Portugal and Spain, let me tell you frankly. So we are Europe, whether we like it or not.
But when we take,
So we have to defend our interests and our values as well.
defense is a good topic. When we take that one, you said it yourself. There's no sense in blaming others. When I take that topic of defense, we have that clear target from NATO, that 2% target of defense expenditures from the GDP. Not a lot of European countries really fulfill that target. We have Poland, which succeed, or which really goes over that 2, 3, 4%, but all the others are struggling. In that regard as well, shouldn't the European countries be more looking at themselves and say, this is our responsibility?
No, I think so. From my point of view, Trump is right. In fact, I remember it was already with George W. Bush, I remember well, but also Obama. I was in NATO meetings since the 80s, when I was deputy foreign minister. All the American presidents were asking Europe to do more. But of course, Trump has done it in a more, let's say, it in his idiosyncratic style. Let's call it like that. Anyhow, and he has a point there. And in fact, now most countries will reach 2% this year or next year in NATO.
Trump asks for 5. That's
and
a lot.
I believe it's going to be up. The decision is going to be taken in NATO summit this month, so I think in 23rd or 24th of June. Most likely there will be something around 3% or 3.5 as the new goal. And I think it makes sense. But it's not just the issue about how much. It's how to invest. Because Europe, if you put together, for instance, the armed forces of France, Germany, UK is not in the European Union, other countries, all of them together, it's not negligible. The problem is that they are not really compatible in many areas. So we need to make joint investments. And the great change now, it's really a dramatic change, is Germany. I know Friedrich Merz for many years now. And in fact, it's a complete change. I mean, Germany has changed their constitution on the debt brake. Why? Because, not only because of the perception of the threat coming from Moscow, but also because of uncertainty coming from Washington. Friedrich Merz said it clearly. So, and if Germany invests massively in defense, and I'm sure they will, because I'm also part of that and some consultations with my friends there, and in the European Union, of course, it makes a lot of difference, because it's not just going to be about defense, hard defense. It's about industry in general, and matters that are related to defense, like, by the way, some technological sectors. So that's an opportunity for Europe, and I've been saying that for many, many years. At that time, there was no conditions in Europe for many reasons. For instance, why we should invest more in research that is for dual use, including for defense.
Europe has never, or the European Union has never spoken with just one voice, which is normal, because there are so many different countries there. One crisis you also spoke about is a crisis of nationalism, also within the borders of the European Union, within Europe. We just saw that, for example, Poland changes governments again. The prime minister seems to be a little bit less EU-friendly than others. We know other countries.
The president.
The president, exactly. Then we have Hungary. We have other examples. Honestly, isn't the idea of a united and unified Europe just a pipe dream
I don't think so. And by the way, I'm no longer representing the European Union here. I'm no longer in public office. And as I usually say, since I left office, my sincerity is growing day by day. So I'm speaking on my own behalf. I remain very committed to the European, but I'm not speaking on behalf of Europe. So I may be wrong, of course. We all have our bias. Yeah. And I certainly have my own bias.
Which means you can speak more openly, maybe, as well.
Can speak. I'm speaking on my own, with full intellectual independence. I'm not speaking on behalf of anyone. So, but from my experience, the European Union is going to continue to make progress in terms of integration. It's in times of crisis that the European makes progress. And now defense, the military aspect is making us to be together. You mentioned Poland. Of course, we know that there are differences there. But the Polish are probably the strongest in terms of a united Europe when it comes to prepare for a war with Russia. Yeah. I remember meeting Kaczynski, the late President Kaczynski, that everybody in Brussels were calling him, oh, he's a Eurosceptic, he's against Europe. But he told me, if tomorrow there is a European army, I want Poland to give the 1st Brigade. So he was a conservative guy. He had other kind of values. He had never gone outside of his country before. He was not in, let's say, the bubble of Brussels, but in fact he was not against Europe. He was for a stronger Europe. So we have to include all people. And frankly, remember, now in Italy, Meloni won. The British media presented Meloni as the new fascism almost. I mean, they don't know Italy. Italy is the most creative people in the world. So, of course, and now it's one of the most active governments in Europe. And in fact, making sometimes is the Italian government. So I don't consider Italy anti-European country. On the contrary, okay, they have a different position. Meloni and Macron are not exactly the same person, but in fact, they contribute to a stronger Europe.
Since you were talking about Poland and talking about the war as well in Ukraine, Poland is very close. You have had, I don't know, the honor, pleasure, or whatever you might call it, to meet Vladimir Putin 25 times.
Yeah. I'm not very proud of it, but no, the reason we have to explain why.
Yeah, okay.
The reason was that at that time we have the so-called summits every year with our strategic partners. So usually it's one a year with the United States, with China, with Japan, and so on. And Russia, being the only strategic partner, as we call them at that moment, in Europe, it was before I came, we had twice a year. So I met him during 10 years, at least 24 times. But in fact, sometimes he was not the president, he was the prime minister. But even then he came to Brussels, I went to Moscow, and I met him also in the, let's say, back-to-back meetings in the G8. At that time, Russia was part of the G8 and the G20. So I'm not especially proud of it, but in fact, I think
So you're a little bit familiar with him or with his thinkings. Do you think it might be possible? And we're really talking about things we don't know, and we all hope won't happen. But do you think it might be possible that the war is enlarging, that he might actually attack other countries in Europe?
Yeah, I think if he could, he will, because look, I spoke about these matters with Putin a lot. When he invaded Crimea, I was still in the Commission. I already made this public, but I can speak about this again if you want. And I called him. And we treat on first-name basis. I called him Vladimir, he calls me José Manuel. I said, what's going on? Why are you invading Crimea? And of course, I had my staff taking notes, and he also had. And he said, no, it's not an invasion of Crimea. You know, there are a lot of connections between Russia and Crimea. We have a lot of people around, some families there, the cousins, some tourists. And they were called by the other guys in Crimea to help. And then he added, because if it was the Russian army, I can tell you, we would take Kiev in less than 2 weeks. He said this to me in 2014. Taking Kiev in less 2 weeks. And the reason about Ukraine is not about to have some more territory. He does not believe, he has a sentiment that Ukraine should not exist as an independent country. One day in a very difficult argument we had, he said, why are you defending Ukraine? You know very well that Ukraine is an artificial country created by the CIA, United States CIA, and by the European Commission. I said, look, if it was the Commission who created Ukraine, I should have known it. No, we did not create Ukraine. So in fact, he thinks that that space of some countries that were in the former Soviet Union should not be independent. That's what he thinks. I have no doubts about it. And the problem is that some of those countries are members of the European Union and members of NATO. So this is why...
Namely the Baltic states.
Exactly.
We're talking
this is why the best way to defend peace now is to support Ukraine. Because if not, the empowerment of Mr. Putin could possibly encourage him to other adventures. I hope it will not happen. I don't think it is likely, because he also is an intelligent man. He makes, a rational man. He makes cost-benefit analysis. So, but he's a product of resentment. So he's someone who has a deep resentment of the humiliation of Russia, not the Soviet Union, not of communism, but in nationalistic terms, why the Russians lost their country after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So many, in his view, stayed outside without the protection of the mother Russia of countries. So it's a very deep matter. So he's an autocrat, clearly. He wants to keep power, that's obvious. But I think he's relatively sincere when it comes to this deep resentment against Europe, against the West, and he wants to make some kind of revanchism or revisionism.
Let's make a hard cut here from Europe, from the Ukraine, back to Switzerland. We have a fantastic cartoon by the fantastic Swiss cartoonist Chapat. Maybe we can show it. It goes back to the tariffs again, where we see Switzerland being knocked out by President Trump and maybe dreaming of Europe, which brings me to the question, could all these discussions around tariffs and all these deals at the moment maybe bring Switzerland closer to Europe?
Closer, maybe, but not inside Europe, I don't feel. In the European Union, I don't think. I know Switzerland a little bit. So I don't think it's realistic to think about Switzerland and the European Union in the foreseeable future. By the way, but that's a decision for the Swiss. I mean, it's very important to understand that we are the European Union. We are not the Soviet Union. Countries join only if they want, and they leave if they want. The good thing about the Brexit was that we have shown that if one country wants to leave, it can leave. Goodbye. Nobody made a problem for that. If one country wants to join and it fulfills the conditions, if it fulfills the conditions, can join. So this is very important. But look at the UK. And I've been living in the UK the last 7 years. The UK, now more than 60% of the UK people say it was not a success. They don't say it was necessarily the bad decision, but at least it did not went the way they thought. And now there is...
Didn't bring the promises they were...
One of the promises was to reduce migration. In fact, it increased exponentially. Exponentially migration. So it's a complete... it was, really a very bad process. Anyhow, now there is a reset going on. By the way, I can tell you something. Those who are now pushing stronger for European defense in Europe are the British. The British, not in the European Union, but working with some other countries in Europe and with the European Union to build European defense, because they feel that on those matters I take this British extremely seriously, probably because of history. During the history of my country, the English were always with us when we were invaded. And they are almost always right. And they know about Russia, and they don't trust the United States the same way they were trusting before. They were the ones who said, we need to have a European defense. The British. So, and Britain, it's a relevant country. So I think it makes sense for us in Europe, including Norway, Switzerland, if Switzerland wants, and possibly some others, for instance, to work in terms of defense industry. It makes sense.
We are indeed, in fact, as you know, in discussions with Brussels, with the European Union. We asked the audience yesterday if they had the choice, and if they could decide now, today, whether they should vote yes or no or maybe to the deal, the treaty that is put in front of them, which we don't know yet, but which we will be knowing in the future. What would they decide? And I'm quite curious as well what they actually answered. We won't be voting on this for another 2, 3, or 4 years, but maybe we could just show the results of that poll we had yesterday. So quite overwhelmingly, 69% of the people here would say yes, we should vote yes. I will not ask you, Mr. Barroso, what you would vote, or even
I think
tell
these
us
are
to
very
do.
intelligent and
Okay, that says. But can you tell us in one or two sentences how do you see it? Why would it be important?
I am biased in this case pro-Switzerland. I'm biased pro-Switzerland because I love your country. My first son was born here. I was spending. And Switzerland is one of the most European countries, if not, it's a quintessential European country. Switzerland in the middle of Europe, and in fact, if you look at the statistics, not just about the dreams, in terms of trade and investment, Switzerland is more integrated in Europe than most European countries. Some people don't think about it. But Switzerland has decided, for reasons that I fully understand, historic reasons, cultural reasons, and so on. One of my colleagues in Geneva made a PhD thesis about comment devient-on Suisse? How do we become Swiss? Mm-hmm. So what are the reasons why there is a Swiss identity? I admire very much the Swiss identity, really admire the culture of work ethic, the effort, the initiative, the independence. I love that. And the reason is that we respect that. For a political reason, Switzerland has decided not to be a member. Okay, if one day Switzerland wants to consider it, let's discuss it. But now I don't think it's wise to push on one side or the other for that, but try to find a pragmatic solution. There were more than 100, and that I know because I was president of the Commission. I tried to make things with Switzerland go on, but it was very difficult on both sides. To be honest, sometimes on the Swiss side, but sometimes also some countries in Europe were making it very difficult, very difficult. I was in favor of making it.
You're free to name them if you want.
The neighbors, France, Germany, and Italy. These are the countries that are more difficult when it comes to, it's not Sweden, it's not Latvia, it's not Portugal, no. It is the countries around because they have a lot of interests. And when you are closer, it's when you have sometimes more contradictions. So, and of course, and these countries are very influential in the European system of decision making. So I think now, after all these years, they came to some package agreement that respects, in my view, respects the concerns of independence, autonomy, sovereignty of Switzerland. Europe made a lot of concessions as well, I have to say. In fact, they made more concessions to Switzerland than with UK in terms of the Brexit. Okay. And that's important because many of the Swiss diplomats, I know they have been my colleagues or they have been my students because I was teaching afterwards in Geneva too. So some of them are my students. And during this period, when it was the Brexit, I was no longer in the Commission. I was in consultation with some of my friends here in Switzerland, and some of them said, it's better to wait for Brexit because the UK is such an important country, they will get a better deal, and afterwards we'll follow the same deal. It was a mistake. I told them, don't do that. Don't do that, because the Europeans are not going to make it easy for the UK. It's much better that you negotiate this now the best you can. They did not. They were waiting for the UK, and in fact now it was possible with the Switzerland to come to a better agreement, but not because of the UK at that time, because the UK did not get such a good agreement as the current agreement is for Switzerland.
We only have a couple of minutes left. I want to take two questions from the audience. Fantastic questions, if I may say so. One is brilliant. If Europe were a company, since we're at the Swiss Economic Forum, if Europe were a company, is it more of a startup in need of funding or a legacy brand in need of rebranding?
Great question. If I was Swiss, I would invest in your image, your brand. Switzerland has a very good brand.
But the question was about Europe.
I speak about Europe.
Yes.
Oh, Europe.
It's more difficult, isn't it?
Yeah, we are at least 27 countries. Okay, so that's a great question because, in fact, Europe has a problem of branding. When I came to the Commission in 2004, I was at 2004. I was very aware of this, and I invited the best marketing people in Europe, communication experts, to say, what can we do to have a better communication? And one of them was a French guy, in fact, very influential in the elections in France. He said to me, whatever you do in Brussels, you will not solve the problems. You may have the best marketing in the world. It depends on your countries. Because if you send a message, but there is a contradiction afterwards, what they say in Paris or in Berlin or at that time in London, it's not working. So, and what happens in Europe, in the European Union, I can tell you with complete independence, is that the governments of Europe, the politicians in Europe, they Europeanize failure and they nationalize success. When things are good, it's their merit. When things go wrong, it's fault of Brussels. It's very easy. It's very easy. And this is why it's so difficult for Europe to have a common branding. Yeah. For instance, when it was the tsunami in Indonesia, I went there with the then president of the council, Jean-Claude Juncker. And I was received by the president of Indonesia. He was so grateful. He said, you are by far the biggest supporter. You gave us more support than any other country or group of countries in the world. Mm-hmm. But they were only speaking about the United States. Because the United States, there was Colin Powell arrived there, were forced to. Without our Commissioner for Development, nobody knew him, you know. Mm-hmm. So in fact, the United States have a power brand. It's the United States of America. In Europe, it's much more blurred. It's France, it's Germany, it's European institutions, it's Italy, it's all of us, by the way, the 27, but it's more blurred. So we have a problem of branding. I believe that we should invest in a rebranding that case, but for that, we need the support of our shareholders, mm-hmm. and the shareholders of Europe are the member states.
Final question, Mr. Barroso. A completely personal question. I've met you about 15 years ago, or 20 years ago even, and I think you haven't aged a day. You haven't aged a bit, and that made me think of Cristiano Ronaldo, another famous Portuguese. I saw him play 2 days ago, and he doesn't age either. What is it? The Portuguese food, the drinks? Can you give us an advice there?
Now, one day I had that discussion with President Obama, but it was not about Portugal. In fact, it was about Greece, because it was during the Greek crisis. And I told him, do you know that Greece has a higher life expectancy than the United States? He did not know it. Portugal also has a higher life expectancy than the United States. And he said, oh, it's because of the Mediterranean diet, he said. And I said, but why they have a lower child mortality? Because we also have a lower child mortality. So I think in Europe, with all our problems of lack of competitiveness, we have a model that so far, it's one of the best places to be in the world. It's certainly Europe. Now, about Portugal, of course, I'm patriotic. I don't see any kind of contradiction between loving our country very deeply and also having a European citizenship, or even a commitment to mankind. Mankind, today it's not very fashionable to quote Russian authors, but I love the Russian authors, Dostoevsky. And in Dostoevsky, there is a personage who said, my father loved mankind in general. It's brothers, Karamazov brothers. My father loved mankind in general, but he hated every person in particular. Now, when I speak about mankind, I speak about not the abstract statistic quality, but about every man, every woman, every child. That is the European concept. We are in favor of not the state, not the party, not just the market, but about people. And so the reason to answer your question is, my motto is, never lose your enthusiasm, even when you lose all your illusions.
Mr. Barroso, let's take that as your final quote. Thank you so much. Thank you.